Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Daniel. I am 32 years old, and before everything collapsed, I worked as an HVAC technician in Duluth, Minnesota. My life used to be about thermostats, refrigerant lines, burner assemblies, and service calls that ran too late into the evening. I spent years crawling through crawl spaces and attics, sealing air leaks and putting in high-efficiency furnaces to keep people warm through long winters off Lake Superior. Those same skills are the reason I am still alive now. When the first reports started, they sounded distant. A new virus, strange behavior, people attacking each other. It did not feel real. The news anchors spoke in calm voices. Charts flashed on the screen. The first time I saw it in person was at a gas station on the west side of Duluth, just off Interstate 35, 2 blocks from a house where I'd installed a new boiler the week before. A man in a winter jacket staggered across the parking lot and fell against a pump. The clerk ran out and tried to help. The man lunged at the clerk with a strength that did not match his shaky walk. Police sirens followed. People screamed. I drove my service van away as fast as I could. That was the last normal workday I ever had. The next week turned the city into something unrecognizable. Emergency alerts hit our phones. First they said to stay home. Then they said to avoid crowds. Then they said hospitals were at capacity. The virus did something to the brain, they said, and people who should not have been walking kept moving anyway. The infected did not respond to pain. They did not seem to feel the cold. They were fast enough, and they did not get tired. My apartment was a 1-bedroom unit off Central Entrance, a few miles uphill from the lake. It was not a place you could defend. Shared hallways, thin doors, neighbors who had already started panicking. I listened to police scanners and watched as call volumes exploded. Crashes, fights, fires, missing people. The city's sound changed. Sirens stayed on almost all day. Helicopters came and went from the hospital roof. I knew 2 things for sure. The first was that the infected would spread through dense neighborhoods faster than anyone could contain them. The second was that winter in northern Minnesota would not care that there was a virus. It would still bring wind chills that froze exposed skin in minutes. Anyone caught outside without shelter would not last long, infected or not. So I decided to leave the city and build a shelter that could keep out both the cold and the dead. My only plan was a place I knew from hunting trips with my father, about 60 miles north of Duluth, past 2 harbors along Minnesota Highway 61. Then inland on winding county roads. There was an old property outside a small town called Finland. My father's friend had owned an unused maintenance garage on a bit of land there, a concrete block building with a steel roof and a wood stove. He had passed away 3 years earlier, and as far as I knew, no one had taken over the place. The key was still on my father's ring. My father had not lived to see the outbreak. A heart attack had taken him 2 winters before. That key sat in a bowl by my door. I picked it up, slid it into my pocket, and decided that old garage would be my shelter. On the last morning in my apartment, I stood at the window and watched smoke rise from downtown. The lake was a flat grey sheet. The streets below were half empty and half chaos. 2 vehicles were abandoned in the intersection. A figure moved strangely along the sidewalk, stopping only when someone stepped out of a doorway. I did not wait for what came next. I packed the van like it was my last service call, because it was. First, tools, cordless drills, impact driver, hand tools, a coil of Romex cable, boxes of screws, tape measure, utility knives, a hammer drill, and every roll of insulation tape I had left in the van. Then, spare parts, thermostats, relays, contactors, fuses, pipe fittings, ducting. Most people would have seen random junk. I saw the pieces of a life support system. From my apartment, I carried out clothes, my warmest Carhartt jacket, wool socks, thermal underwear, gloves, my old snowmobile helmet with a clear visor, and a pair of insulated boots rated to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. I grabbed every can of food from my pantry, a 5-gallon jug of water, a small propane camp stove, and a compact first aid kit I'd used on jobs. The only firearms I owned were a Ruger 22 rifle from childhood plinking, a Mossberg 500 12-gauge pump shotgun I used for deer drives, and a box and a half of 9x19mm ammunition for a Glock 19 pistol I kept locked up. I loaded all of it into the van, along with 2 boxes of .22 long rifle and a few dozen 12-gauge shells. It did not feel like enough, but it was all I had. By the time I locked the apartment door and walked down the stairwell, I could hear sirens moving closer. Somewhere, someone shouted for help. I forced myself not to look. I had a very narrow window to get ahead of the wave of people who would try to flee the city once the highways clogged. Driving down the hill toward the lake, I passed the hospital. The parking lot was jammed. A police car sat at an angle across the main entrance. People were gathered near the doors, pushing and yelling. A firefighter stood on top of a pickup truck trying to direct them. Someone fell. The crowd surged. I turned my eyes back to the road and merged onto Interstate 35. The southern lanes heading into downtown were blocked solid. The northbound lanes I needed were still moving. I saw multiple vehicles stopped on the shoulder with doors open. At one point, a figure ran towards the van with arms flailing. Their clothing was stained. I did not slow down. Survival was no longer about being polite. Once I turned onto Highway 61 and followed the shoreline, the city fell behind me. Lake Superior stretched to the horizon, a dark grey mass of moving water. The houses thinned out. The radio stations played recorded messages on repeat. Stay in place, wait for instructions. Nobody had real instructions anymore. After 2 hours, I passed through 2 harbours. Some houses had vehicles in front with trunks open. I saw a state patrol cruiser blocking the entrance to a grocery store. People milled in the parking lot. The officer inside the car stared straight ahead, hands on the wheel. I did not stop. At the turnout where I usually park during fall hunting season, I left the highway and turned inland. The county road was narrower and partially covered in packed snow and ice. Snowbanks rose on both sides. The temperature outside hovered around 15 degrees Fahrenheit, dropping as the sun slid lower. I reached the property in the early afternoon. The old maintenance garage sat about a quarter-mile down a ploughed driveway, surrounded by a mix of spruce, birch, and aspen. A small creek ran across the back edge of the land. I could see the white steel roof through the trees, streaked with rust stains. The front bay door was closed. No vehicle tracks cut through the fresh dusting of snow. I pulled up to the smaller side door, shut off the engine, and listened. No movement inside, no voices, no unusual sounds from the woods. I slid the Glock from its holster and kept it in my right hand while I unlocked the door with my left. The key still worked. The deadbolt turned with a stiff click. I pushed the door inward and stepped into cold air that smelled like old oil and sawdust. The garage was exactly as I remembered. One large open bay with a concrete floor, high ceiling, and exposed steel trusses. A steel chimney rose from a heavy cast-iron wood stove in the corner. Metal shelves lined the back wall, stacked with boxes, old parts, and a few dusty tools. A small enclosed room near the rear held what had once been a crude office and sleeping area, with a cot, a desk, and a small sink connected to a plastic water tank. There were no signs of fresh footprints, no food left behind, no power to the lights when I flipped the switch. This place was not a home, not yet, but it was 4 solid concrete walls, a metal roof, and a wood stove. It was a shell, and I knew how to make shells into shelters. I backed the van inside and closed the bay door behind me. The manual chain slid down into its track with a heavy, metallic rattle. It felt like lowering a drawbridge, only in reverse. The first priority was heat. Outside air would drop well below 0 overnight. The wind would pick up and push cold into every gap. Concrete and steel did not hold warmth on their own. But I had a stove, a flue, a pile of old scrap lumber stacked along the back wall, and an entire building I could insulate. I started by clearing the area around the wood stove, the flue pipe still connected to the chimney collar. I checked every joint, tightened clamps, and inspected the metal for cracks or rust through. Everything was intact. Next to the stove, I found a stack of split birch and maple covered by a dusty tarp, dry and ready to burn. I crumpled old newspaper from a box, stacked kindling in a crisscross pattern, and lit it. The flames caught quickly. Within minutes, the cast iron walls of the stove began to warm. I closed the door, adjusted the damper, and watched the temperature slowly climb on the magnetic thermometer attached to the stovepipe. 50 degrees, 70, 90. If I pushed it, that stove could turn the entire concrete box into a tolerable space, but the heat would bleed out unless I created barriers. From the van, I carried in rolls of fiberglass insulation and 2 unopened rolls of clear plastic sheeting I had left over from a basement job. I had no drywall or framing lumber, but I did have duct tape, screws, heavy-duty staples, and enough creativity from years of patching up questionable structures. I built a room inside the room. Using old 2x4s scavenged from a corner of the garage, I framed a rectangle around the sleeping area and desk, about 12 feet by 16. I anchored the top to existing beams with screws and metal brackets. I did not bother with full-height walls at first. I went just high enough to hang plastic sheeting from the top down, sealing it to the floor with tape. I stapled insulation between the studs, paper side facing in, then stretched the plastic as tight as I could. It crinkled and reflected the light from my flashlight and the flame behind the glass stove door. A small doorway opening faced the stove. I hung an extra piece of plastic there as a makeshift curtain. It would not be perfect, but it would trap warm air and create a heated core. I pulled the cot inside that plastic cocoon, along with my sleeping bag, food crates, and a 5-gallon bucket I lined with a trash bag for emergency waste until I set up something better. By the time I finished, the sun had vanished, and the world outside the small windows was deep blue. The temperature inside the garage had stabilized around 45 degrees. Inside the plastic-walled core, it was a comfortable 65, according to the little digital thermometer I kept in my tool bag. I ate cold canned chili straight from the can with a metal spoon, washing it down with careful sips of water. I listened to the wood crackle in the stove and the faint howl of wind outside. The infected, if they were anywhere nearby, stayed silent. I did not relax, but I allowed myself to breathe. That first night in the shelter, I lay awake on the cot and thought about what I would need to do to make this place more than temporary. Heat was only one part of survival. I needed water, food, security, and a way to monitor what was happening beyond my patch of trees. I needed to make the building strong enough that if a group of infected or desperate people pushed on it, it would not fail. I fell asleep, planning instead of worrying. It was the only way I could keep my mind from spinning. The next morning, frost coated the inside of the bay door, where warm interior air had met cold steel. I woke with a slight headache from the dry heat and checked the stove first thing. The coals were nearly out. I stirred them, added more wood, and opened the damper until flames rose again. I walked the perimeter of the building with the Glock in my hand and my jacket zipped up to my throat. The snow in the driveway held only my old tire tracks. No new footprints, no vehicle tracks leaving or entering. Behind the garage, the small creek ran shallow and partly frozen, with a narrow channel of moving water cutting through the ice. I tested it with my boot and judged it safe enough to stand near. I broke a hole in the edge of the ice with the back of an axe and filled a 5-gallon bucket. It would need boiling, but at least it was there. Back inside, I took stock of what I had. Food. About 2 weeks of canned goods if I rationed carefully. Some rice, some pasta, no fresh vegetables or fruit. I made a list of calories in my head, more out of habit than precision. Water. Enough for 3 days if I was careful, plus the creek as a resupply source. Fuel. 1 large stack of wood, enough for a week of heavy burning, maybe 2 if I was efficient. A few gallons of gasoline in red cans for the service van. No generator yet. No propane beyond my small camp cylinder. Tools, more than most people would have, but still limited by what I could carry in one van. Weapons, a rifle suited for small game, a shotgun suited for deer, and a pistol suited for close defense. Not ideal for holding off a crowd, but manageable. The shelter itself, 4 reinforced concrete block walls, about 8 inches thick, with a steel roof and a solid bay door. 2 small windows at about head height on the side walls. A personnel door I had locked and could reinforce further. No view above the tree line. No elevated position. The main weaknesses were obvious. I could not see beyond my immediate surroundings. If a large group, infected or living, approached, I would not have much warning. If they reached the walls, I could do little beyond staying quiet and hoping they lost interest. The cold worked in my favour though. It pushed sound through the air more clearly, and it would discourage people from wandering too far without purpose. I decided to change the shelter's role from simply a box to hide inside into a controlled environment I could manage. First, insulation. The concrete walls sucked heat away. I marked stud locations along the walls using chalk, drilling holes into the concrete and hammering in masonry anchors. I ran vertical furring strips of scrap lumber along all 4 walls, then wedged fiberglass insulation between them and sealed it all with plastic. It was not code-compliant work. It did not have to be. It only had to keep heat from bleeding out faster than I could make it. Second, air quality. A wood stove in a sealed, insulated room can kill just as easily as cold. Carbon monoxide is silent. I dug through the boxes of leftover parts and found a battery-powered carbon monoxide detector I had pulled from a job when I replaced it with a new one. I pressed the test button. It beeped to life. I mounted it at eye level near the sleeping area. I also cracked a small vent near the stove, drilling a 4-inch hole and installing a short piece of duct with a manual damper. It would let me bring in controlled fresh air instead of relying on leaks. Third, water. Carrying buckets from the creek over ice and snow was not sustainable. I used PEX tubing from my van, a small submersible pump I had once used to drain a flooded basement, and a plastic barrel I found in the corner of the garage. I set the barrel on a stand near the back wall, ran tubing through a drilled hole and down to the creek. The pump would move water from the creek to the barrel whenever I powered it with a small inverter connected to the van's battery. It was not elegant, but it meant I could fill the barrel every few days without hauling heavy buckets. Fourth, power. The van's alternator could recharge its battery, but idling the engine for hours would burn fuel quickly. I needed something better. I knew from past jobs that many cabins and remote garages used portable generators. The next small town over, Finland, had a hardware store and a gas station. If civilization had not completely fallen apart out here yet, I might still find something. Risk versus reward. That was the equation now. I decided to go. I waited until midday, when the light was strongest, then parked the van outside with the front pointed toward the road for a quick exit. I left the shotgun on the passenger seat, the pistol on my hip, and the .22 rifle in the back with a magazine loaded. Equipment for a supply run in what used to be a calm rural area suddenly felt like gear for a patrol. On the drive into Finland, the snowbanks stood shoulder high. The road had not seen a plough since the last storm, but enough tyre tracks existed to keep my wheels in a rough path. The sky was a flat, pale blue. My breath fogged the inside of the windshield until the defroster caught up. The town itself was small. A gas station with 2 pumps, a bar, a tiny independent grocery, and the hardware store. At least, that was how it had been. When I turned onto the main street, only one vehicle sat in front of the gas station, its driver's door hanging open. The grocery's front door stood ajar. No people in sight. I drove slowly, scanning every doorway and alley. The engine sounded too loud in the silence. I pulled up in front of the hardware store and left the engine idling. If I needed to leave fast, I did not want to worry about a cold start. Shotgun in hand, I stepped out onto packed snow. The front window of the hardware store was intact. The open sign hung lopsided. I eased the door open with my left foot and listened. No voices, no footsteps, just the hum of refrigerated units running on backup batteries somewhere in the back, barely hanging on. "Hello?" I called, just loud enough to be heard nearby. No answer. Inside, the shelves were mostly untouched. This was northern Minnesota, not Minneapolis. People here knew how to get through storms. They already had supplies at home, or maybe they had not fully understood what was happening yet. I forced myself to move quickly and efficiently instead of taking everything I saw. A small Honda generator sat in a display near the front. I recognized the model immediately. Quiet, reliable, capable of producing about 1800 watts of continuous power, enough to run lights, a small pump, or charge batteries. I grabbed it by the handle and carried it to the door. On the way back through the aisles, I picked up extension cords, a pair of LED work lights, a box of heavy-duty batteries, a coil of rope, and a pack of motion-activated driveway alarms meant to beep whenever a car approached. I did not care about the car feature. I cared that they used battery-powered infrared sensors and wireless alerts. Behind the counter, a notepad sat next to an open register. I looked at the pen marks on the last page, a list of ordered items and a phone number updated several days earlier. I felt a moment of guilt about not paying, then shoved it aside. At that moment, paper money meant less than a working generator. At the gas station, I found the same emptiness. The lights were off. The pumps had no power. Inside, I took 2 5-gallon fuel cans and filled them from the underground tanks using an emergency hand pump I found in a maintenance closet. It was hard work, pumping steadily in the cold, but I ended up with 20 gallons of gasoline between the cans and the van's tank. As I screwed the last cap on the fuel can, I heard a sound from behind the building, a dragging shuffle across snow, followed by a low, wet groan. I tightened my grip on the shotgun and moved slowly around the corner, keeping my back to the wall. Behind the gas station, by the dumpsters, a single figure stood in the snow, a man in a brown winter coat, head tilted at an odd angle, arms hanging loosely. The skin around his eyes was dark, his breath steamed in fast bursts, his boots were planted wide, as if his balance were off. When he saw me, his head snapped upright. His mouth opened, his eyes focused on me in a way that did not feel like recognition, just target acquisition. "Infected," I said quietly, just to hear my own voice. He moved faster than his slack posture suggested. His boots dug into the snow and his arms reached out. He made no sound beyond a steady rasp of air. I did not wait. I raised the shotgun, aimed center mass like every safety course had taught me, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed against my shoulder. The infected man staggered backward and fell into the snow. He twitched once, then went still. The echo of the shot bounced off the quiet buildings. The smell of burned powder filled the air. I stood for a moment, listening for any response. No answering cries, no movement. The world returned to thick silence, broken only by my own breathing and the faint rumble of the van engine. I walked back to the driver's seat, placed the shotgun on the passenger side again, and forced my hands to stop shaking before I drove away. On the road back to the shelter, I replayed the scene in my head. How close he had been, how fast he moved, the way he had not reacted to the shotgun's muzzle pointed straight at him. It confirmed what I had already suspected. These infected people did not think like we did. They did not show hesitation or fear. They simply moved toward living bodies. When I reached the garage, I closed the bay door, shut down the van, and locked everything. I carried the generator inside and set it near the back wall, away from the stove. Portable generators cannot run indoors safely. They produce exhaust that can kill. I knew that better than most. I planned to run it outside with the exhaust pointed away from the building, cords fed through a sealed opening. Over the next 3 days, my life settled into a new pattern. Mornings began with checking the stove, feeding it wood, and verifying the carbon monoxide alarm stayed silent. Then I would inspect the perimeter, refill the barrel with water using the creek pump, and melt snow if needed. Midday was for construction and planning. Evenings were for quiet listening, the radio, and rest. I set up the motion-activated driveway alarms along the tree line, about 50 yards out from the garage. The sensors pointed toward the driveway and the woods. Their receivers sat on the shelf next to my cot, ready to beep if anything warm moved through their fields of view. With ducting scrap, I built a small insulated box that fit around an open window frame. It allowed me to run extension cords out, while still stuffing the gaps with fiberglass and cloth to keep heat in. When I needed power for tools or the pump, I rolled the generator outside, started it, and connected devices through that box. When not in use, the generator sat inside, dry and protected, with fuel cans nearby. The improvement I valued most, though, was visibility. I could not change the garage's ground level position, but I could change my vantage point. A tall spruce stood just beyond the back wall, sturdy and free of low branches. Using lag bolts, scrap lumber, and climbing straps, I built a small platform about 15 feet up the trunk. It was not a proper tree house, just a 2x6 frame with a layer of plywood. I screwed a simple railing around 3 sides and left one side open toward the garage. A ladder made of 2x4s and rebar rungs led up from the ground. From that platform, I could look over the trees toward the road and see anyone approaching before they got too close. On the third afternoon, while I sat on that platform scanning the snowy access road with the .22 rifle across my lap, the driveway alarm beeped once, then twice in quick sequence. Something was moving along the trees near the entrance. I lifted my binoculars and scanned. At first, all I saw were white drifts and dark tree trunks. Then a figure appeared between 2 birches, a person in a bright blue parka, hood up, stumbling slightly but clearly steering toward the garage. Another smaller figure came into view behind them, trying to keep up. They were not moving with the lurching, uncoordinated gait I had seen at the gas station. They were not focusing straight ahead with that vacant, locked stare. These 2 stopped to look around. The taller figure adjusted the strap of a backpack. The smaller one, almost certainly a child, held something in their arms. I pulled the radio receiver closer and listened. The sensors beeped again as they crossed the line. They were heading straight for my front door. Every survival instinct in me yelled to keep them away. More people meant more noise, more supplies consumed, more chance of mistakes. But leaving a child outside in northern Minnesota with night coming early was the same as a slow execution. I had not changed enough to accept that. I slung the rifle over my back, climbed down, and moved around to the front of the building. I stayed behind the corner, watching. The woman, because I could see her face now, looked to be in her mid-30s. Her cheeks were red from the cold. Strands of dark hair blew from her hood. She supported a girl of maybe 7 or 8, wrapped in a pink jacket and holding a stuffed animal to her chest. Both of them walked carefully, like they knew moving too fast on icy ground could end in a fall they could not afford. When the woman saw the closed bay door and side entrance, she stopped and scanned the area, then raised a hand and called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Her voice cracked from dryness and strain. "Please." I stepped out from behind the wall, with my pistol holstered, but visible at my hip. "Stop there," I said, holding my hands open to show I was not pointing anything at them yet. "About 20 feet away. I need to know you're not infected." She froze, then helped the child stand more upright. "We're not," she said. "We're just cold." "How long since you were in close contact with anyone sick?" I asked. 2 days, she said. "We left our house in Silver Bay. There were people on our street who changed. We ran. We've been walking since yesterday morning." Her lips trembled as she spoke, not from cold, from exhaustion and fear. I watched them closely for signs I'd learned to associate with infection. Unsteady gait independent of fatigue, lack of response to pain, strange focus. I saw none of that. I saw a mother doing everything she could to keep a child upright. "What's your name?" I asked. "Kayla," she said. "This is my daughter, Lucy." "My name is Daniel," I said, You can come inside, slowly. I have to check you first. No offense meant. None taken, she said. Thank you. I opened the side door and guided them into the unheated outer room of the garage. I kept my distance at first, watching for sudden changes. Up close, I could see how pale their skin was. Their gloves were thin, not meant for days outdoors. Their boots were more like city winter boots, not insulated workwear. I checked their hands and faces for bites or obvious injuries. I asked if they had been scratched or grabbed. They both shook their heads. Kayla rolled up her sleeves to show unmarked skin. I decided they were as safe as anyone could be now. Inside this plastic room, it's warm, I said. We stay quiet. We only go outside for wood, water, or watch duty. Once I close this door, we keep it that way, unless there's a good reason. Understood? Yes, Kayla said. Her eyes shone at the sight of the warmer air behind the plastic sheet. Lucy just nodded. Inside the heated core, I gave them each a mug of heated water with a bit of instant soup mix. I watched them sip it like it was the finest meal on earth. As they warmed, they told me their story. They had lived in a small house in Silver Bay, a town along Highway 61, about half an hour north of Two Harbors. Kayla worked part-time at the local clinic as a nurse. Her husband had been on a work trip when the outbreak hit and never made it back. No calls, no messages after the first day of trouble. When people on their street started changing, attacking, and breaking into homes, she'd grabbed a backpack with some food, water, and clothes for Lucy and left on foot, avoiding the main highway. They had slept one night in an abandoned hunting shack and another under a picnic shelter in a closed campground, with their small camping stove barely keeping their fingers from freezing. At dawn, they had kept moving. By chance, they had followed a side road that led near my driveway and saw the tracks. Your chimney smoke saved us, Kayla said. We saw it through the trees. I nodded. Every bit of exhaust, every plume of wood smoke was a signal. In this case, it had drawn people who still thought and spoke. It could just as easily have drawn the infected. I would have to accept both risks. With 3 people in the shelter, everything I had planned became more urgent. We restructured tasks. I taught Kayla how to manage the wood stove, how to watch the magnetic thermometer and adjust the damper so we did not overfire it. She already understood health and sanitation in ways I did not. She improved our waste system by setting up a lined bucket with a better lid, moved it away from our sleeping area, and took charge of boiling and filtering creek water. She'd brought a small bottle of water purification tablets. We used them carefully. Lucy, despite being a child, had tasks too. She sorted canned goods by content and expiry date with me, helped untangle cords, and learned how to operate the driveway alarm receivers. Giving her responsibilities reduced her fear. She also drew on scrap paper I brought from the desk. Her simple drawings of a house with smoke from the chimney, 3 stick figures, and a big circle labelled sun reminded me why the shelter mattered. I spent more time on the roof, clearing snow, checking for weaknesses, and thinking about reinforcement. If the infected ever gathered in large numbers, they could push against doors until something snapped or twisted. Concrete held up, but steel doors warped. The bay door in particular, with its multiple panels and tracks, was a vulnerability. I decided to turn our own van into a barricade. One clear morning, I backed the van up so its front bumper pressed directly against the inside of the closed bay door, then set the parking brake and chocked the wheels with cinder blocks. If anything tried to ram the door from the outside, they would be pushing against the weight of the steel panels, the tracks, and a fully loaded service van. That afternoon, while I was drilling holes to add more bolts to the door frame, the driveway alarm went off again. 2 beeps from the sensor closest to the road, then a third. I climbed the ladder to the platform, heart already speeding up. With the binoculars, I scanned the trees. This time, I saw 3 figures. The first walked with a steady pace, carrying something on their shoulder that glinted in the low light, probably a tool or a weapon. The second moved slightly behind, with a limp but controlled gait. The third figure followed, turning their head more often, watching the surroundings. As they moved closer, details came into focus. The lead figure wore a high-visibility jacket, the kind used by utility workers. A hard hat hung from their backpack. The object on their shoulder was a long-handled tool, likely a lineman's stick or pry bar. The second figure's limp seemed from injury, not infection. The third carried a bulky backpack with a rolled sleeping pad strapped on. When they reached the open area near the driveway, the lead figure raised both hands. "We see your sensors," he called out. His voice sounded steady and clear. "We're not sick, just trying not to freeze." I kept the .22 rifle across my lap, but did not point it directly. "Stop there and keep your hands where I can see them," I answered. "We'll talk first." They obeyed. Up close, they looked rough but alive. The man in the high-visibility jacket looked about 40, with a short beard and tired grey eyes. The second, a woman in her late 20s, had a bandage wrapped around her upper left leg under her pants, where the fabric was stained but not soaked. The third, a younger man, held a coil of rope and a metal toolbox. "We were repairing lines," the older man said. "Lake County Power. When things went bad, they called us back to the service centre in Two Harbors, then told us to go home and wait. We tried. Did not work. We left the town 2 days ago. We saw your smoke yesterday, but were too far away to get here before dark." "What are your names?" I asked. "Mike," the older man said, tapping his chest. "That's Erin, and that's Tyler." I studied them for signs of infection. They looked cold, exhausted, and wary, but they responded normally, answered questions rationally, and reacted to the cold. "Any bites? Scratches from infected?" I asked. "No," Mike said. "Erin took a piece of metal to the leg when a truck hit a pole. Clean wound. We wrapped it. We've been careful." I climbed down and met them outside the door, pistol visible but still holstered. I repeated the same inspection I had with Kayla and Lucy. The bandage on Erin's leg was soaked with dried residue, but showed no signs of infection spreading under the skin. The injury looked like a cut, not a bite. She winced when I touched the area, which reassured me. The infected I had seen did not respond to pain in the same way. "You're welcome to come inside," I said finally. "If you follow the same rules as the others, we keep quiet, we stay clean, we work." "We can work," Mike said immediately. "I know power systems. I can wire anything you've got and bring it up safe. Tyler's good with tools. Erin's stubborn." Erin gave him a tired smile. "And I'm a paramedic," she said. "Or I was. I can help your nurse." Having a paramedic and a power lineman in a hardened shelter felt like winning the lottery in the middle of a storm. That night, with 5 of us inside the insulated core, the room felt almost crowded. We rearranged sleeping setups, hung one more layer of plastic curtain near the stove to trap heat, and set new rules. No loud conversation after dark, one person awake at all times. No one goes outside alone, not even to use the waste bucket. With more hands, our shelter transformed faster. Mike examined my generator setup, nodded at the Honda, and suggested we wire a small sub-panel with a transfer switch. That way, we could safely power selected outlets and lights without running extension cords everywhere. He used lengths of Romex and an old breaker panel from the hardware store salvage I had brought home. Together, we mounted LED shop lights along the ceiling and connected them to a single switch. The first time we flipped it on with the generator running outside, bright white light flooded the garage. For a moment, everyone just stood there, blinking. It had not been truly bright in any of our lives since the grid had gone unstable. Erin and Kayla set up a proper medical corner in the old office room, using the desk as a treatment area. They cleaned Erin's leg with antiseptic, changed dressings, and arranged medicines from both their kits and what we found in a supply drawer. They also implemented strict hand washing with boiled water and soap after any outside work. Tyler helped me with the roof. Together we added a second layer of plywood over weak spots, screwed down sheets of metal sheathing where snow had started to creep under old flashing, and extended the chimney cap to prevent downdrafts when the wind blew from the north. As the days passed, the temperature outside dipped lower. Nighttime readings on the outside thermometer dropped to -15 degrees Fahrenheit, sometimes lower. The snow squeaked under boots and took on a dry, powdery texture that blew easily in gusts. The creek narrowed, only a thin, dark line of moving water left in the center. The infected did not disappear, but they moved differently in the cold. From the tree platform and small holes we had cut in the plastic to use as observation ports, we watched them occasionally. They wandered the tree line like lost hikers, heads turning slowly, scanning. Their steps were slower but steady, as if the cold affected their bodies but not enough to stop them. Sometimes they would bump into a tree or a snowbank, adjust, and keep going. Their clothing froze against their bodies. Their breath hung in quick bursts. We stayed quiet when they passed. We cut generator run times to the bare minimum so we would not create constant sound. We used wood from pallets and scrap lumber instead of going out to cut new logs where noise would travel. The first real test of our shelter came on a night when the wind rose sharply from the northwest and the sky turned clear, letting temperatures drop even faster. It began with a triple beep from the driveway sensor closest to the road, followed by another triple beep from the sensor 20 yards nearer the garage. Then silence. Then 3 more beeps from both sensors again. "Multiple," Tyler said, standing under the sensor panel, eyes wide. "Coming in groups." We had pre-arranged roles for exactly this scenario. I grabbed the shotgun and .22 and headed for the ladder to the platform. Mike took position by a narrow slit we had left between insulation panels near the bay door, where he could watch the immediate approach with a pair of binoculars. Kayla and Erin guided Lucy into the office room and closed the door, turning down the lamp and keeping her near the back wall. From the platform, night vision was limited. The moon was not up yet. The snow reflected what little light the sky offered. I scanned with binoculars anyway. They emerged from the line of spruce trees in uneven clumps. At first, I thought they were deer. Dark shapes moving against the snow, heads low, shoulders hunched. Then one stepped into a patch of open space, and I saw the outline clearly. Humans, or what had been human, wearing heavy winter clothes now stiff with ice. Some wore orange hunting caps. One still had a blaze vest on, frozen into a rigid shape. Another wore a parka with a large torn section at the hem. Their faces were pale and wrong, eyes too wide, jaws slack. They moved toward the garage like iron filings to a magnet. "Count at least 10, I whispered into the small handheld radio we used inside. We had found it in a box of construction gear and paired it with 2 more, one for the platform and one near the stove. Maybe more behind them. "Copy," Mike answered quietly. "They coming straight at us or drifting by?" "Straight." We had assumed that at some point a group of infected would pick up our heat or smell and converge. We had talked through plans for silent defense, using the .22 rifle with subsonic rounds to minimize noise, avoiding shotgun blasts unless there was no choice, and relying as much as possible on the strength of the shelter itself. "Remember," I murmured into the radio, "doors stay closed. No one open anything unless I say so. We cannot let them see light." As the infected approached, their pace increased slightly. One tripped over a snow-covered stump, fell, and scrambled back up without hesitation, barely noticing the impact. Another bumped into the trunk of a tree, bounced off, and kept walking. They made no calls to each other, no speech, just steady, purposeful movement. They reached the cleared area around the garage and fanned out, drawn by something, perhaps residual sound, perhaps human scent leaking from tiny gaps. 2 went to the bay door and pressed their hands flat against the steel. Another circled to the side entrance and tried the handle. It rattled against the latch and deadbolt. The sound of skin and gloved hands thumping against metal echoed through the interior. Lucy whimpered behind the office door. Kayla shushed her softly. Molten fear tried to push through my calm, but I forced myself to stay focused on tasks. Our best defense was staying inside and quiet, letting the cold and the difficulty of breaking reinforced doors work for us. One infected man spotted the ladder leading up to my platform and began to approach it. His boots crunched in the snow. His gaze fixed on the dark shape of the tree trunk. He reached the first rung and put his hand on it. "He's going for the ladder," I murmured. "One right below me." "Can you take him?" "Quiet," Mike asked. "I think so." I slid the .22 rifle's bolt back quietly and eased it forward with a new round chambered. At 15 feet, aiming down from the platform, my target was clear in the dim light. I knew what I needed to do, but I also knew each shot was still noise, even if small. The infected started to climb. His body moved with a strange combination of coordination and stiffness, like his muscles remembered the motion, but his brain did not control it fully. I took a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The report was a small crack compared to the shotgun, but in the cold night it sounded sharp. The infected jerked, lost his grip, and fell back into the snow. He lay still, limbs at odd angles. All the others stopped for a second, their heads turned toward the sound. Then they refocused on the building and scratched at the walls with renewed energy. "Only one shot," I said quickly into the radio. "He is down. They're more agitated now, but the structure is holding." We kept our positions, letting the shelter earn its keep. For nearly an hour, the infected tried to gain entry. They pushed against the bay door, but the van behind it held firm. They pounded on the side door until their gloved hands left smears of packed snow and dirt on the steel. Two tried to climb up onto a small stack of pallets near a window, but the glass was reinforced with a steel mesh I'd installed earlier. They could not break through with their bare hands. The night grew colder. I could see frost forming on their eyebrows and eyelashes. Their movements slowed. One by one, they started to drift away, losing focus. A few remained close, pacing in stiff circles. Eventually, even they wandered back toward the trees, following some invisible pull. When the last of them left the immediate area, the driveway alarms fell silent. "Hold positions for 20 more minutes," I said. "Then we can stand down in shifts." My fingers were numb despite insulated gloves. The platform's plywood had grown slick with a thin layer of frost. When I finally climbed down, my legs shook from cold and adrenaline. Inside the plastic-walled core, the air felt almost too warm. Everyone looked tired but alert. Lucy slept in a cocoon of sleeping bags and blankets, her stuffed animal clutched tight. "We did it," Mike said quietly, sitting near the stove with the radio handset in his lap. "The shelter held." "It held because we built it to," I said. "We need to keep reinforcing. That will not be the last group that finds us." Over the following days, we hardened the shelter even further. We drove old metal fence panels into the frozen ground around the building, creating a perimeter that would slow anyone trying to reach the walls directly. We tied lengths of wire between trees and panels at ankle height, so anything walking through would trip or at least stumble, giving us an early warning in the form of crashes and curses. Mike and Tyler rigged a set of red LED indicator lights connected to the driveway alarm receivers, giving us silent visual alerts instead of beeps when we wanted to stay especially quiet. The lights glowed faintly above the stove, one for each sensor. We added an airlock entry system at the side door by building a small vestibule just inside, using more plastic and scrap lumber. Anyone entering had to step into a small area, close the outer door, and wait for inspection before we opened the inner barrier. It was not high-tech, but it reduced drafts and gave us another layer of security. The routine of life settled into a pattern again, now with more people and more defined roles. We rotated watch shifts on the platform and inside by the sensors. We split chores, wood cutting, water pumping, food preparation, repair work. We rationed food carefully, stretching every can and bag of rice. The stillness around us did not mean the world was stable. We knew that somewhere beyond our trees, towns were burning, roads were blocked, and people were making desperate decisions. We stayed aware through a small battery-powered radio that still picked up occasional emergency broadcasts. The messages grew less frequent every week. One afternoon, in midwinter, when the sun barely climbed above the trees, we heard something new. A faint broadcast from what sounded like a local sheriff's department repeater, announcing a designated safety corridor along a section of highway to the south, where a group of responders and volunteers were trying to escort people to a hastily organized camp near a dam. A camp means food, Tyler said. Medicine, maybe more news. It also means crowds, I said. And infected. And people who may decide our supplies look better than theirs. You think we should stay here, Mike said. I think we built this place to survive the cold and the infected, I said. A camp behind temporary fences on a highway is not guaranteed to last through one big wave of infected, let alone the whole winter. Kayla listened quietly, then said, if we were completely out of medicine or food, the camp might be worth the risk. Right now, we have enough to get through at least another month if we stretch. We have heat, we have clean water, the camp might be better, but it might be worse. Here, we control what happens at our doors. In the end, we agreed to stay put, but we also agreed on something else. We were no longer just hiding. We were a functioning shelter with skills and resources. When spring came and the snow began to retreat, we could cautiously reach out, offer a safe place for a few more people, and maybe rebuild something beyond just our walls. Until then, our mission stayed simple: keep the shelter strong, keep the cold out, and keep the dead away. As winter deepened, we faced more close calls. A generator carburetor that clogged from bad fuel and needed careful cleaning in the middle of a cold night. A near miss when a chunk of ice slid from the roof and nearly took out one of our perimeter sensors. A day when the creek froze almost solid and we had to break through thick ice with axes to reach moving water again. We adapted to each problem. When the generator acted up, Mike and I disassembled it on a tarp near the stove, laying out jets, float bowls, and gaskets in neat rows, cleaning each piece with fuel and compressed air from a portable tank I had salvaged from a job site. We put it back together and tested it outside, relieved when its steady hum returned. When the creek froze, we rerouted the intake to the deepest part, using longer tubing and a homemade weighted intake screen made from perforated PVC and mesh. Every small technical fix felt like reclaiming a bit of control from chaos. On an evening near the end of winter, when the first hints of longer daylight began to appear, we stood together outside for a rare moment with the sun still above the trees. Our breath floated in front of us. The garage behind us looked less like an abandoned maintenance building and more like a fortified outpost. Smoke curled from the extended chimney. Fencing and tripwires glinted. Our footprints formed clear paths between woodpiles, the creek, and the door. We built this, Tyler said quietly. We did, I said. This shelter was just a concrete box before. Now it is the reason we are all standing here. Kayla put a hand on Lucy's shoulder. Erin leaned on Mike's arm, her legs still healing but stronger each week. We were a group now, not just individuals clutching at survival. I thought back to my old life, to the houses where I'd installed furnaces and heat pumps. People had called me when their heat went out, because they knew they could not face a Minnesota winter without it. Back then, I'd kept strangers warm in buildings they had taken for granted. Now, in a world where the grid had fallen and the roads were dangerous, I was doing the same work on a different scale. I was still an HVAC tech in a way, only now my system was a wood stove, insulation, a portable generator, and walls we had reinforced with our own hands. My job was still simple at its core. Keep the inside safe and livable, keep the outside out. The cold was still there. The dead were still out there, moving slowly through the forests and along empty roads. But between them and us stood concrete, steel, plastic, wood, and the determination of a small group of people who refused to give up. I looked at the garage, at the smoke drifting upward into the pale sky, and felt something solid settle inside me. This was our shelter against the cold and the dead. As long as we kept thinking like builders instead of victims, as long as we treated every day like another step in building a stronger system, this place would hold. And if one day we needed to build again somewhere else, we now knew how. We would bring the lessons of this winter with us: value of solid walls, the importance of insulation and ventilation, the need for quiet alarms and clear lines of sight, and the strength that comes from sharing skills in a small, trusted group. The world outside might never return to what it had been, but inside our shelter, we had carved out a piece of stability. We had proven that even in an outbreak that turned familiar places into hazards, there was still room for careful planning, technical knowledge, and cooperation. I tightened my jacket against the evening chill, nodded once to the others, and led the way back inside to feed the stove, check the sensors, and prepare for another night. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.